Okay, Kristopher, I'm going to talk to you sternly because that's when people use your name, Kristopher, it's usually stern from what I understand. Why don't you start out by introducing yourself?
All right, my name is Kristopher McCarthy, and I'm the training sergeant at the Toronto Police Mounted Unit.
Okay, so I had a big smile on my face when we started recording. Maybe you want to show everybody why you had me laughing as soon as we logged on to our Zoom call.
This is how I've been logging on to every Zoom call. The problem is it's very hard to find the buttons. Very hard.
So does this horse have a name?
This is called my Zoom call icebreaker.
I love it. I love it. So you've obviously like been around the track a couple times with these Zoom calls. Very good to know. And it kind of looks like you have a picture of that same horse behind you. Who is that behind you?
This is just it's one of the things that we always talk about here in training is that you look beyond the obstacle. So we don't want people to focus in on things. We want them to look past it.
Okay, awesome. Very cool. Okay, so Chris, just introduce yourself and tell me a little bit about how you got into policing.
All right, like I said, Kristopher McCarthy, I'm the training sergeant of the Toronto Police Mounted Unit. I got into policing probably in high school was when I was in that transitional period. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I stayed in high school a little longer than I should have just because I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I just kept playing sports and having some fun while I was there. But the three jobs that I was looking at was a veterinarian, a teacher, and a police officer. Those were the three that I kind of sort of landed on. I quickly learned that I didn't have the education or the patience to do the veterinarian side and potentially the teacher side as well. But I was still striving towards those goals. And there was a very unfortunate accident or victim that happened in the city of Toronto. There was a 3-year-old girl that was abducted, and she was found in the lake close to the exhibition grounds here. And it kind of sort of really set home to me at the time because my niece was 3 years old, and obviously such a tragic incident. It kind of sort of guided me in that direction, and I thought, you know what, if there was one thing that I could do, I'd like to save a child. Even if it was just one child, you know, I feel that I would have done my worth as a police officer. So I started going in the field of policing.
So, okay, so remind me, you've been on the job you've been in the mounted unit for 24 years, right?
Yes.
How long have you been on the job for?
About 27 and a half.
Okay, so 27 and a half years. It's interesting to hear you say you didn't have the education for teaching, you didn't have the education for veterinary school. But talking to officers that are coming on the job now, like so many of them are coming on with like multiple degrees or masters, or there's police officers working on their PhDs. But you also have like a really interesting journey through policing that we're going to get to that has allowed you to sort of explore what those other careers might have been like. But first, you said you've been in the mountain unit for 24 years. Where does that compare to other officers who have been in units for a long time? Because that's unusual. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, but don't they usually like you guys moving around every like 5 or 10 years max?
Yeah, they do have tenure here in Toronto, and generally most people only stay in their field for a limited amount of time. I want to say I'm a lucky one. I'm very fortunate or lucky to have had this position for as long as I've had. It wasn't in my forefront when I joined policing, that's for sure. But it's kind of sort of become a lifestyle of mine now, and I'm quite fortunate and happy to have it.
Which is so interesting because, as you pointed out, and I should just say, you and I first talked for the first time just a few days ago, which is so nice because usually when I do like the pre-interview portion, I need to wait like a few weeks just because of various scheduling conflicts on both sides. But I'm still riding the high from our conversation. So everything is very top of mind. But you pointed out during our phone conversation that your superintendent, acting staff superintendent, Tim Crone, though I don't know if he's still acting, he was also profiled in TPS Trust. He had wanted to be in the mounted unit like forever. He was like a 5-year-old boy. He had he got to ride a pony at his 5th birthday party or something like that. You, even though you've been there for 24 years, this wasn't always in your plan. So why don't you just take me back to the beginning of your policing career? Where did you start out? Actually, you know what? Even before we get into that, it wasn't even easy for you to become a police officer, right? And that's sort of an interesting part of your story. So why don't you just start even before you were officially hired, what your journey to policing looked like when you decided to finally settle on that career?
All right. So like I told you how I settled on that career. So then my career goals were focused on becoming a police officer. So obviously I went to college. I was at Sanford Fleming. I took police education. And then from that point forward, you feel, when you get out of college, you have that degree and you're just going to get hired and you're going to, instantly go into the job of your dreams. And that's how it is. I mean, that's how everyone believes it is. But as we all know, that's not the way it is. Generally, getting a career, getting a job is difficult. Getting a career is even more difficult. So the amount of effort that you have to put forward in order to get that job is very long in the tooth of sorts. And sometimes you have to be very persistent, especially if that is what you feel that you would be most utilized in the world as. So like I said, I took that course and I started applying right out of college. And it took me about 2 years to get on the job. At the time, there was a hiring freeze.
Mm-hmm.
I got to different stages with different police departments, but I think I actually got hired on my 13th try.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
What kept, like, how do you have that? I know you said it was just the span of 2 years, but the perseverance involved in that, like, you were just convinced from the get-go and throughout, I guess, that this is the job for me. I'm the right guy. They're going to see it eventually.
Yeah, that was my thought. And obviously different variances as to how far I went, but after an interview or something like that, I would go back and I would try and find out what the feedback was. What was the thing that was holding me back? And a lot of them actually said it was just life experience. Like it's just obviously you got to imagine a 19-year-old child going into to a domestic situation with a couple that's been married for 30 plus years and all the trials and tribulations that come with that. It's very hard to get that instant respect from those people when you're walking in the door and they've got kids your age type thing. So
Yes.
you can totally see where they were going with that. And it wasn't that I wasn't mature or that I wasn't ready for the job, but I guess they just kind of sort of wanted that fine tuning. They wanted that perfect, in a time where hiring was at a premium. You wanted that perfect candidate, and obviously the first 13 times I wasn't that perfect candidate, but I knew in my heart that I was, and it was just a matter of developing myself so that I could achieve my own goal.
So what do you think changed in those two years? Who was Kristopher McCarthy of 2 years before he was hired versus Chris McCarthy when you were actually hired?
I wouldn't say that there's a whole lot that changed. I think the only thing that changed more was the drive. I didn't like to be told no when I felt, deep down inside that was my place in life. So I didn't like the no, and I didn't like, one person being able to decide what I was going to do with my life. So that was more the inner drive that kind of, switched me into a different gear, I would say.
Awesome. Okay, so you get hired on, you're in your 20s. Where do you start your career in policing?
So I started with 51 Division. I love 51 Division. That's in the Regent Park area. What a great learning division. It's very busy. There's lots going on. It's a perfect way to totally get your feet wet in policing because there's such a variety of different things that go on. There's no such thing as that wasted moment because there's pages and pages and pages of calls for you to go to. Wow. And it's just nonstop, one call after the next. And you know what? Some of them are pretty dynamic, but a lot of them are just those everyday calls that police officers have to attend. And it was just the consistency of constantly having those everyday calls that gives you that kind of sort of learning curve that may be a more or better than some of the slower divisions or slower departments.
So what sort of everyday calls were you getting in 51 Division?
Just your typical domestics. You're getting drug abuse, prostitution, like all sorts of, you name the variety, and you get all of that, and then you sprinkle in the car accidents and the traffic related things. So it's a very wide range of policing for sure.
Yeah, it's really 51 Division. I told you when we were speaking on the phone, as a reporter, I always loved working in 51 Division. And it's always remarkable to see how busy you guys are there, considering what a small division it is. When you think about the size of other divisions like 22, 23, basically all 3 district and 4 district, those are big divisions. 51 is just this little slice. What is it? Young to Parliament, something like that. And then does it go up to Bloor, or does it go a little bit north of Bloor and then down to the waterfront?
Yes.
Yeah, it's just this little slice of heaven, and you guys have all sorts of things coming at you. Okay, so you're in 51 Division. If I remember correctly, you were a crew cop, so community response, riding the bicycle around, and that is where you got your first exposure to the mounted unit, right? But it's not like you were like, yeah, I get to learn about the mounted unit. So just tell me about that first exposure and where it took you from there.
So as a crew officer, you do a lot. You help out with demonstrations and parades and large community events and so on that happen amongst the community or downtown Toronto. And because of that, you end up working with police forces on a regular basis. So what the mounted unit offers to the crew officers is once a year. It's kind of like a recertification almost, where they allow the crew officers to come, and then they act as both the crowd and the police, so that they can see it from both sides. And they get taught or instructed on how to work around the horses or work with the horses. So again, I was a crew officer, and we got invited to this course. So I went for the course, and of course, I'm an animal lover, and I've always been an animal lover.
Hence veterinary aspirations.
Correct. So you can only imagine my enjoyment when I got to spend a day, just sitting there amongst, 25 horses running around me. It was a huge pleasure for sure.
Had you ever ridden a horse up until that point?
I wouldn't say that I have. I mean, I at the odd, pony ride where they walk you around, but
right.
No, to my direct knowledge, I can't think of a time that I had ever been on a horse before.
Because you grew up in Durham region, right?
I did, yes.
So it wasn't like rural Durham region, like you weren't out there like working at one of the country stores or anything with horses prancing around in the field. Okay, so you were like living your best life, thinking, "Oh my gosh, I'm getting paid for this day of work with these horses." So then you're joking around with some of your buddies, and what happens from there?
So, as in that close team environment, you start making the jokes and so on, and everyone's daring everyone. At the end of the show or course, the officers on the horses offer the crew officers if anyone would like to sit on the back of a horse for like a picture or anything like that. And back in that time, I think I was the only one out of my group that actually put their hand up and said, "Yeah, I'm going to do this." Right. So I jumped on the back of the horse, and sure enough, as soon as I got up there for that picture, quote unquote picture, it changed in that the officer said, "Do you want to go for a ride? Like, do you want me to walk around a bit?" And of course, all the crew officers that I was with said, "Absolutely, he wants to go for a ride," right? Because now this became a comical thing that they were going to watch me bounce around and get around on the top of the back of a horse. So that's exactly what happened. And you know what? I played along, and I did get bounced around pretty good. And then I got off, and I was like, "That's not too bad. Like, I'd be a mounted officer." And I said it totally in jest, right?
Yes.
Like they were making fun of me, so I kind of sort of threw it back at them like, "This is a piece of cake."
Yeah.
Right. So the senior officer kind of sort of brought me over to the staff sergeant of the mounted unit and said to staff, "This fine young officer right here would like to join the mounted unit." And the staff sergeant said, "Oh, you know what? We've got a class coming up in November. Why don't you apply? Why don't you put your name in?" And of course I said, "Absolutely, staff. Like, you're not going to say no to a staff." So like, "Yeah, absolutely, staff, no problem." So I just left it at that. But of course that senior constable just did not let that go, right?
From 51 Division. This is your colleague from 51.
Exactly.
Okay.
So the van ride back to 51, you can well imagine that it was just bounced around 1,000 times. And it got to the point where I was like, well, you think I'd be afraid to apply to the mounted unit? I'll apply to the mounted unit. And they're like, oh, yeah, do it. I 100% will apply to the mounted unit. So we get back to the barn and they're still chirping me pretty hard. And we're
not the actual barn, to the 51 division state.
I apologize. Yes,
right.
Yes, I apologize. So we get back to 51 and they're still chirping me pretty hard. And we're, doing our end reports and so on. And they said, when are you going to send that email to the staff? And I said, oh, I'll get to it. They're like, no, send it now. You said you're not afraid. So I'm like, all right, I can send this now.
Peer pressure.
And I hit send, right? And that's, honestly, I got 2 or 3 more messages back and I honestly, I didn't reply. And then I walked downstairs one day and we were getting paraded for duty and my staff sergeant said, Chris, you're going to the mounted unit. And that was the expression on your face right now was a bit my I did the exact same thing. I was like, oh darn, this is really gonna happen.
Really?
Yeah.
So when you're going to the mounted unit though, does that mean you're officially a mounted unit officer or you're just going to do the course so that should a space open up, you're eligible to actually join the unit?
Yeah, that's exactly
like more than just the 1-day exposure course that you had.
Yeah, so the course has changed slightly now, but back when I took the course, the course is still 15 weeks in length. But when I took the course, it was 15 weeks. You signed in and you did 15 weeks. Now we've kind of altered it where we do a 2-week course, a 1 to 2 week course in the beginning. And it gives people the opportunity to see whether or not this is going to work for them or whether or not this is something that they'd like to do. And then if they are still committed after that, then they get to continue with the remaining 13 weeks.
Okay.
Right? But back in my day, that didn't happen. It was 15 weeks. You signed in for 15 weeks. You're doing 15 weeks. And that's all. Yeah.
That's really interesting. You didn't mention that in our phone conversation, but it's interesting because of the way, and I'll ask you to do it in a moment, the way that you described how this 15-week course went, just the rigors of it. So it's interesting that now police officers have the opportunity to say like, no, cannot continue. So why don't you just like describe for me how that how those 15 weeks went for you?
From a student's perspective?
Yes.
Okay. So
take off your training hat.
Got it. It is, I've never done a basic training camp with the Army or any of the reserves or anything like that. But what I've seen in movies and TV shows and stuff like that, the amount of stress and mental emotion and physical, stress on your body that is put to any of those soldiers on that length of time, however long that is the best one how I can describe this course. It is a course that you start off where you are walking into a stall with a very large animal in it, and the very large animal knows that you are a new guy, right? They know you're a new guy, and they literally almost have to just hint that they know you're a new guy, and you panic, right? Like there's an instant drawback or whatever because it's the unknown. You're going up against something that is 8-10 times your size, and it's very eye-opening very quickly. Right? So as gentle as they are, and they are gentle giants and sweethearts to be, you're walking into this environment where you just went from answering domestic calls at 51 Division, and now you're sitting in a stall with a 1,800-pound animal, and it's your job to pick up its feet and clean out its hoof, or brush its tail, or groom it, and then saddle it, tack it, and then jump on it and take it for a ride. So it is very difficult to understand the amount of emotions that go through your head over the course of 15 weeks. And I say that because most police officers are an A-type personality, and most of them have been very good at something in their lives, right? Either hockey or sports or a hobby or something. Because when they get that inner sense of this is what I want to do, they can throw everything into it, and they just get better. Horseback riding is a whole different sort, and the reason why is it's not a motorcycle. you don't just sit on it and hit the ignition and it goes, and press the brakes and it stops, and you throw the kickstand on and you're done. Right?
You're going to have some members of the motor squad who are going to be like, excuse me, you come out and try to do these maneuvers.
You know what?
Continue.
No, but fair enough. But they say the same thing about us too. They say, "Oh, it's really easy to sit on the back of a horse." So it kind of sort of goes back and forth. So I'll take the living. I'm good with that. So yes, there's a lot to it, and what's the most draining, I would say, is mental. Like it is mentally draining, and it's mentally draining because you're so used to being successful at things that you try at, and you will have these days where you are the top of the mountain, and you come out and you just look like a superstar that day, right? Like you're an absolute superstar, that you can't do nothing wrong. Everything the instructor's telling you to do, boom, you can do it, right? And your horse can do it. And so you walk out of that day and your head, like you almost float out of the building because your head is so swollen because of the success that you just had that day, right? The sad part is the mounted unit is very much a team environment. And there was someone in that class that day that didn't have your day, right? That didn't have your day. And they had the exact opposite. They had that day where, every single thing went wrong, like every single thing that went wrong. And the other thing that you start doing is you start comparing horses, right? Like so-and-so rode that horse yesterday and they had a great day. So now I'm on that horse today. So I'm going to have a great day. And then you come in and you're that officer that doesn't have a good day, right? But that horse has been spectacular for 4 days in a row and you've got him on the fifth. And all of a sudden he's not spectacular. And it's very hard to blame the horse, right? Because its track record says something different. So then it kind of sort of sits in your brain. And as it sits in your brain, it's that mental block that you have to be better, right? You have to be better. And then you end up going the next day or the next ride on whatever horse you're on, and you can't get rid of that thought in your head that I've got to be better, I've got to be better, I've got to be better. And then you try and push forward, and now you're trying twice as hard, right? So you're gritting your teeth and you're trying to really drive that horse down, which is the exact opposite way that you need to ride a horse. You need to ride a horse relaxed, and you have to move with that horse. And the more you tense up and get angry, the more, I'm going to switch to my training hat for a second, but I always say that,
allow it.
Okay, thank you. I always say that you have to move with the horse and you have to relax. So I always use a G.I. Joe. Imagine sticking a G.I. Joe figure and sticking it on a remote control car and hitting go on the remote control car, right? It's not going to last long before that thing leaves because they're stiff and they're rigid. And when you're on a horse, you have to be loose and you have to be forgiving and supple, and you have to make sure that you move with the action of the horse. Well, when you're angry and you're trying to be better, you end up being tense, right? And so as much as you're trying as hard as you can, you're actually making it worse, right? So the officer's psyche just goes up and down. It's like a roller coaster, right? They're flying high and then all of a sudden they just drop down. And that low can be a day, it can be 10 minutes, it could be 3 weeks, right? Where they just feel like they are the bottom of the pile. And every single person around them is constantly trying to, lift them back up and say, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this. But once it's in your head, it's hard to get rid of. It really is hard to get rid of. But you just have to be determined and you just have to move forward.
So, okay. So you went from sort of joking around with your buddies, like, yeah, I could do the mounted unit. Of course I'll apply. And then you're told that you have to go do this course. And from what I recall in our phone conversation, you were like, well, this isn't going to turn into anything, right? You were just like, I'm going to get paid for 15 weeks of like riding a horse along. So tell me, how did the reality compare or contrast to what your expectations were going into that course? And why did you care so much? Why does that bring you down so much when you're thinking, well, I'm probably not going to be sticking around here?
Very true. That was my mindset. That I was obviously very young in my career at that time, and I thought to myself, did I just do career suicide? Am I going somewhere that is just, a dead end job that's not going to go anywhere, and I'm not going to be able to do anything with it, and I'm not going to be a police officer anymore? So there's lots of those constant questions that go through your head for sure.
Interesting.
During the class, I really loved it, and I actually was the top of my class, and I quite enjoyed every single thing that I did. and I was offered the position by my training sergeant first. He kind of sort of came to me and said, you know what, we'd really like to see if we could keep you aboard. To which I was really humming and hawing over it. You know, I really love this. I just don't know if I'm at that point in my career.
You still felt like you weren't really doing policing if you were in the mounted unit?
Absolutely. That's how you feel for sure, right?
I feel like there's other roles in the police service as well, where I've spoken with people, not necessarily as part of this campaign, but just over my years of reporting, where they felt like they're like, am I being punished? Am I being demoted? But they ended up being hit with this unexpected challenge and loving it and not wanting to ever do anything again.
Yeah. And I would say that is what the mounted unit is for most. And I got on the unit. When I got on the unit, you ride that 8-month high, right? That 8-month high of this is a new experience, and you're rolling with it, and this is fun and exciting.
Okay, but wait, go back a second. So the training sergeant said, we'd really like for you to join. You were humming and hawing. So how did you get, like, were you basically like voluntold to officially be part of this? Or how did you get to the point of, you know what? Okay, I'll do it.
Yeah. So he kind of threw me a bone. It was the wrong bone, but I like it anyways, because I'm here today, so I can't complain. But he threw me a bone. He said, oh, when you're on the mounted unit, it's great promotion too. So, you know what, I'm thinking to myself, I'm young in my career, promotion is very far away, but whatever, right? Sure, I'll go for it. So that's how I jumped aboard.
So it's not a good place for promotion. Is that what you're saying?
It's not a good place.
But you were promoted in the mounted unit.
I was. You can get promoted out of the mounted unit.
Yes. Okay.
I can assure you, I'm living proof. It can happen.
Yeah, you started as a constable, now you're a sergeant.
That's right. I can name lots that have, so yes, you can. Anyways, I got on to the mounted unit, and I got onto a great shift that actually had one of the other training sergeants had taken over that. They had switched roles, so he had taken over that shift, and that ended up where I landed, was on that shift. So what a great learning experience. Literally, I just went from one training sergeant to the other, but now one is my platoon sergeant. So it was a great way on how to learn the job. And there's so much to the job of the mounted unit that, you know, that people just don't realize, and they don't understand.
So like what? Tell me about the job.
Okay, so when you think of the mounted unit, everyone always immediately goes to crowd control. You know, our primary response is crowd control. And that's probably what got said to me 24 years ago. That's essentially what was said. You know, we're all about crowd control. It's crowd control. We gotta, you know, work with the public order. We have to do this. We have to do this.
It's getting people out of the entertainment district at 2 a.m. Yeah, it's
absolutely
the G20. I mean, the G20 was quite a ways into your career, but that sort of stuff.
Yep, that's exactly what our large sporting events, any kind of demonstrations, protests, anything like that. So that's what it was really aimed for. I would say now the thing is completely flipped, and divisional support is probably our number one duty or detail now, is divisional support. And I would say our second is probably search. We do a lot of searches per year. And that, I would say, is our second.
So break that down for me then. Divisional support, what are divisions calling you guys for? And do you gallop to the division? I don't think so.
No, we don't gallop.
You would if you were allowed to, though, I bet, right?
It is fun sometimes, but no, it's the footing in Toronto is so, like, every 10 feet it changes.
Of course.
And it makes it very, very dangerous. So no, as much as I would love to be, you know, Arnold Schwarzenegger on True Lies and, you know, jump across buildings on my horse, it's not something that you'll ever see me even attempt.
Maybe once you become staff sergeant one day, that'll be.
Yeah, that won't happen. That won't happen either. So the divisional support, as the superintendent was saying, and in one of your other ones, tragic events happen in Toronto all the time, and it's unfortunate, but it's reality.
Mm-hmm.
And those divisions, when those tragic events happen, they require all the resources that they can to kind of sort of bring the community back to its normal day-to-day routine, as well as making them feel comforted and safe. The mounted unit is probably one of the best resources you can stick in a community that is in that, very dramatic trial period of trying to get that comfort and security. And I said this to you on the phone when we had the earlier interview, but I often say that the horses remind me of the Dickie Bee or the ice cream truck. The second the horses land on a street, everybody knows you're there. Like, everybody knows you're there. And what that does for the community is the community looks at it as the police are willing to go to every last step that they can possibly can. They'll pull every resource that they can to bring the community back to its normal state, its safe, regular state that they are used to. And when you bring a horse down the street, people open doors, they open windows, and then from there they walk out their doors, they drag their kids, or usually it's their kids dragging them right up to see the horses, and the conversations begin. And I think that I'm going to go back to where I said there's sometimes where I feel I'm not a police officer anymore because I was worried that I wasn't going to be a police officer anymore. I would say that I'm almost now more of a police officer than ever before. And the reason why I would say that is because I actually get to deal with the community on a personal basis. Nobody called me there. Nobody asked me to come to their neighborhood. Nobody, is in crisis. Nobody is driving, and has had something traumatic happen to them and they require the police there. I answer those calls because I've chosen to answer them because some other resources has come, but I'm coming there to assist. But what a police horse does is open up a line of communication that is it's unfounded. It really is unfounded. And I love that you made me bring up 51 Division because you asked me to tell a story about 51 Division. So here's my story from 51 Division. When I became a mounted officer and I went back to 51 Division, you got to imagine I was a crew officer, so I knew everybody in the divisions, I knew the communities, I knew everything because that was my job when I was a crew officer, right? So you get to know a lot of faces, you get to know a lot of people, and you get to have those conversations. I went back on a police horse, and I will never forget. I walked up, and I don't even know the person or the gentleman's name, but I went up and I said hello to somebody that I had said hello to 1,000 times, right, on a bicycle. But now I'm on a horse, and they were like, yeah. And they'd start talking about the horse, and as they were talking about the horse, all of a sudden it was like the light goes off. It's like, I know you, right? And they start asking me questions, and then I was like, hey, and then they turned around to their buddies and said, this officer right here, this officer is one of the best officers. And like 3 months ago, that conversation would have never happened, right?
Really?
Because it's just the way the community perceives you so much different when you're on the back of a horse. And
do you think it's easier for them to see past the uniform? Like, I've talked to a lot of other officers about the barrier that the uniform sometimes creates for people to just interact with you, because for some people it's like, you're a police officer, I'm not talking to you.
Absolutely.
You're more human when you're on the back of a horse, I guess.
And well, you become more humanized for sure. And just that,
which is interesting. Let's just point out, because who else is riding on the back of a horse through Toronto?
Nobody.
Yeah, exactly. You're one of us. You're on the back of a horse.
It's crazy. Like, I'll never forget the very first day that I went out on the road in training. We obviously have to get the officers ready to go out on the road. So when it gets to the 8, 9, 10, 11 week mark, we'll suit them up and we walk around the scenic grounds and we just kind of sort of get them used to, traffic and cars and how to do different things. And I remember this lady screaming at the top of her lungs. She's waving like this, and I'm thinking, okay, there's an emergency. There's something here, right? And I'm kind of looking around, and we're directed to stop. And I'm ready, and I'm ready to take this report or do something. I want to help. And she goes, "Oh, I just want to know the name of your horse." And she starts petting. And I honestly, I looked down at my body. I'll never forget it. I looked down, and same with the same in the day in 51 division. I looked down and I thought, I am wearing the exact same uniform I wore 3 months ago, 4 months ago, however long it was, right?
Wow.
And the difference in perception is night and day. And again, I truly believe that that communication barrier gets broken, or the trust gets reestablished, let's say, in that they look at you different because they start asking silly, what seems like a silly question to you, it ends up being, a huge question to them, but they're so interested in, the name of the horse, breed of the horse, how tall is the horse, are they friends? Do they listen? Do they come to their name? Like every question you could possibly imagine.
Are they friends? Like, are the horses friends with each other?
They ask you, name the question, I've been asked for sure. Right.
Wow.
But you start off with that happy moment. And one of those things that's very difficult from a mounted officer, or one of the things that we look for sure, is we want that someone that is going to give that same enthusiastic answer on the 150th time that they were asked that day, the same question, right? Because it may be the 150th time that you've answered it, but it's the first time that that person's asking it, right?
I love
And
that.
we've had so many people. We had a lovely lady that we actually brought into our mounted family. She was a 90-year-old woman, near and dear to our hearts, Dorothy Keith. She's a sweetheart of a woman, and she's passed now. But she came to our unit, and she was just there with her caregiver. And when she came to our unit, she told us of a time that her father took her down to Sunnybrook Park, and she used to watch the horses with her dad, right? And this is when she was a young girl, and how much memories that brought back to her as an adult, and even more now, that her dad had long passed by that point, and she could relive those memories. But those memories get started because of that officer. They get started because of that officer that has opened that line of communication, that is, open their own personal life to that public member who's asking a question. And generally that trust starts being established at that point. And then from there, it kind of sort of bleeds into why we were there in the first place, right? So it could have been, or are you here for that incident that happened on Friday night? Or did you know that every Thursday night this happens? Like a lot of details come out that you would never, ever, ever get on a bicycle or in a car, because most of the times people see police and they're either standoffish and they're like, nope, I don't want anything to do with that. Or they're like, these guys are really busy. Let them do their job. They're doing their job, right? But being on the back of a horse, for some reason, it just opens up that line of communication. And it usually starts with the animal, and I 100% get it.
And just listening to you talk, I'm going to assume that you probably conducted yourself in the same way when you were a bike cop, a crew officer in 51 Division, as when you went in on the back of a horse. It's not like you were like, I'm here on my bike, don't talk to me. Like, you're probably like a pretty personable guy back then. It's just the horse that changed things.
I would tell you, I hang out with those bike officers all the time, and they are some of the friendliest. Like, they're so funny. They're normal human beings. They really are. And yes, I conducted that. That's why the very first time that I, had that 51 citizen that I was talking to, or community member that I was talking to, and he finally, the light went off that it was me. I literally did a double check. Like, I'm looking at myself going, I don't sound any different. I'm not acting any different. I'm in the same clothing that I was in before, so I don't look any different. And yet, just the presence of that animal is what kind of sort of broke down those barriers.
Do you recall why you were in 51 Division that day? Why the mounted unit was called
there?
Well,
we probably were there. We do a lot of community events, and we do a lot of public relations. That's another one of our primary responses, is public relations. So we do a lot of that.
I want to drill down a little bit into the divisional support, because I think it's so important what you've described. And I've seen the same thing in my years of crime reporting in Toronto, where a traumatic incident happens. Maybe there's like a daylight shooting, which happens unfortunately quite a bit in certain neighborhoods. And like one day, all the kids are playing in the playground. And the next day after this shooting happens, as a reporter, I would show up and people are talking to you through their screen doors, or they've covered their windows, or like you can hear a pin drop walking down the street in the middle of like a Saturday afternoon. Mm-hmm. So to have you guys go in there and make people feel safe, like I'll often say in conversations about community safety, that it's not just about being safe. Like I would say that the perception of safety that police give to a community is just as important as actual safety, because people should feel safe in their homes. So for you to make them feel safe just by trotting down, or what do you call it when a horse is walking? It's not a trot, it's a just walking. Okay. Walking down the street, click, clack, click, clack. Like that's actually huge, because I think you and I don't know where you live now, but we take it for granted what a privilege it is to feel safe inside your own home. Absolutely. And for a lot of people, especially after those incidents, they don't feel safe inside their home. So right. I just I need to just put an exclamation mark on that point that you made about divisional policing, because that's no small deal.
No, that is what makes that is like the glue that keeps everything together. It really is, because you have to have that line of communication. That it has to be open, and it has to remain open. The partnership building, or the bridge building, it starts there, and that is, it just enables the officers that are going forward and they're going in for those calls. It enables them a solid platform to start with, right? And have that trust factor to start with.
So just to extrapolate on that, because as I mentioned in our phone conversation, when it comes to things like police budget, or, any conversations around policing and divisions that are needed and are not, the mounted unit is one that comes up all the time. Why do we need police officers on horses in the year 2023? But you going in there, you have somebody coming up to you saying, how tall is your horse? Is your horse friends with that guy's horse? And then saying, are you here because of the shooting that happened yesterday? And then talking, like, I would presume, given what you have said and what Tim Crone said in a previous conversation, that you can draw a direct line between the mounted unit and like homicides potentially being solved, maybe guns being taken off the streets, with actual community safety, people being arrested, because it's the ignition that sparks that conversation and gets a person who would otherwise be reluctant to talk to a police officer to maybe then walk into that police station and give a statement. Am I going too far with that?
No, not at all. I believe that the horses are invaluable for just that. They are that first line in the sand, and you're there to make people feel safe and to reestablish and open up those lines of communication. And if you can build that trust factor from that very first appearance, or that very first patrol that you're out there for, if you can start building on it there, and it can gradually go forward from there, then yes, people are now starting to look at it and go, you know what, these police officers are human. Like they live in homes too, and they want to live in safe, environments, and they believe that kids should grow up with playgrounds and such, right? So
playgrounds they can actually use.
Exactly, right? So that is just it's the starting point, but I think it's a crucial starting point that often gets overlooked when people are talking about disbanding the mounted unit. And when you talk about disbanding the mounted unit, I have been fortunate enough that I have been directly involved with reestablishing or teaching a majority of the mounted units in Canada, and a lot in the States as well.
How many mounted units are there in Canada?
So I did this trivia test to my people the other day. There are 8 established mounted units, and then there are several that are more ceremonial. So I like working mounted units. There are 8.
Okay.
And out of the 8, I have personally worked with almost a majority of the officers minus two, which is Montreal and Vancouver. However, I can honestly say I speak to Vancouver on the phone probably 2 times a month.
Really?
And Montreal, I have kept in very close contacts with as well.
Does Calgary have a mounted unit?
Calgary does.
Okay, because I was just thinking like Calgary Stampede. Could
Times.
you imagine if they didn't have a mounted unit?
Yes. I've been to Calgary a couple times. Lovely unit.
Yes. Okay, so divisional support we talked about. You also mentioned search and rescue, and I thought this was really interesting when you brought it up in our phone chat because it makes so much sense, but I'd never considered it before. I always think about other policing tools as, like there's some police services that have air support, and I know you guys call upon that sometimes too, but just describe to me the benefit of having a horse when, say, somebody with dementia goes missing.
Yeah, so I was a search manager here in Toronto for a little while, and then my schedule kind of sort of got hectic and I was unable to continue with the program. But I remember when I was a search manager, I kept saying, we should really try these horses. Like they should get out there and they should, start looking and assisting. When it comes to searches, you mentioned dementia. So you'd start with the characteristics of a lost person with dementia. And dementia, a lot of times, they're going back to old memories. So you're looking at old residents, old workplaces, things like that. That's where they'll go. They're often drawn to animals, which is a key factor for us, like a key factor for us. And then for they have what's called ping points. Like if it's really hardcore dementia, they have the inability to make true decisions. So they'll get to a point where, they've always walked down this sidewalk and now Toronto is changed the sidewalk or they're in the midst of doing construction on it. And there's that detour sign that is just unfathomable for someone with dementia. And that's usually where the lost happens because they don't know to turn left or right. And they end up following a path or a straight line in a direction. And that's how they end up getting lost. For the police horses, the benefit to them is that they're much taller than police officers are, right? So by the time you're sitting on the back of one of our horses, you're almost 10 plus feet in the air. And your perspective is very different when you're 10 plus feet in the air, right? You can see basically down the entire street. You can look into most people's backyards just from street level. So things like that change. The other thing that works to our advantage is if you think of the larger green spaces in Toronto, and I hear giggles every single time I hear this because most people, when they think of Toronto, they think of tall skyscrapers and a cement world. But we have a lot of green spaces in Toronto. Like we have a lot of places where people get lost, or go there on purpose to get lost. But the police horses can go through, a much more rough or harder terrain that would take the average police officer three to four times to trudge through, and
or a machete.
But not get the same results, right?
Yeah.
Whereas you being at a higher level, the horses are just walking in their natural state, and you can see a much greater distance. And if the person wants to be found, they can see you. So it's not just someone screaming a name. Your name's not being screamed by a stranger from a distance. And like lost kids are great. Moms and dads are really good at teaching their kids never to answer to their name and, stranger. So now you're out there looking for a lost child and you're calling their name. Well, if they're scared and they're lost, they're not going to necessarily appear to strangers that they've never heard that voice before. But if you're sitting on the back of a horse and you are up enough, in height that they can see you as well, you might have that advantage. And
you're wearing that uniform. I mean, there's not going to be like a cowboy going through the Don Valley looking for somebody. Yes. You don't have a lasso or anything. Okay, so that's really interesting. Okay, so but 24 years in the mounted unit, how does that happen? How is it that you've managed to stay that long to get promoted in the mounted unit? And you have how many? 3 more years on the job?
I'm going to stay till 30, yeah. So I've got like 3 years left.
And I assume you're going to ride that out, no pun intended, in the mounted unit?
I hope to,
okay.
Yes.
So
Yes.
how does one stay in the mounted unit for so long?
It's not a common thing,
Mm-hmm.
but it's more common than you may think. Not in the 20-year range, but um, like I said, policing on the back of a horse is very difficult, and it's difficult for a couple of reasons. Because one, you have to have a skill set of how to ride a horse,
Mm-hmm.
right? And two, you have to have a skill set of being a police officer,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to find a way to merge those two things and still do the job of a police officer while keeping an 1,800-pound animal at bay and doing everything that you're asking of it. So those type of skill sets are ones that when you have them, you don't want to get rid of,
Mm.
right? So you got to imagine. So at the end of a 15-week course, it's said that an officer has about 3 to 5 years riding experience. At the end of 3 months, they have 3 to 5 years. Now that sounds outrageous. People are like, well, how in the world is that possible? Well, it's possible because they're putting about 4 to 5 hours a day or 5 days a week. They're doing 25 hours a week times, I don't even know how many weeks, 15, times 15 weeks,
Yeah.
right? Times 15 weeks. And the amount of hours that equals would equal that of someone taking riding lessons
Hmm.
on an average of a 1 hour riding lesson once a week,
Wow.
right? And that's how it ends up being 3 to 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
But that skill set is, you are so bottom of the barrel when you come out. Like you have every single thing you need. You have all the tools that you need. But the longer you stay in that job, the longer the different kinds of horses that you're using, the different exposures that each of those horses have, you just gain experience every single time, right? And you just continue to gain experience and continue to gain experience. So that officer that has 5 years on the job here really has 15 years worth of riding,
Wow.
right? Or 20 years worth of riding. And it's very hard to justify having someone come in that has 3 years worth of riding when you have someone that has 20 years worth of riding.
Mm-hmm. And they're happy
Right?
to stay.
Yeah, and happy to stay. So that's where that kind of sort of comes into play. I was fortunate when I got on the job. I was able to stay at the mounted unit, like we had said, once I got hired to the mounted unit. But within the first 2 years, I had joined the training section.
Mm.
I had joined it as a train the trainer kind of thing, so I wasn't an actual trainer. I was just kind of shadowing the trainers. And I did that. It was supposed to be a 6 month stint, and I ended up staying in it for like 3 years.
Wow.
And then I went back out onto a shift again, and then I got bounced back into the training, and then I got promoted. And when I got promoted, it was right around the G20. And
That'll do it. G20 needs some officers on horses.
yeah, so that there was a business case proposal that was put in by the boss at the time, and that's how I was fortunate enough to get to stay.
Okay, so then looking back, like 24 years ago, when you were kind of thinking, is this gonna damage my career? Am I gonna have missed opportunities? Do you feel now that being in the same unit for 24 years, have you had missed opportunities, or the things that you wanted to do as a police officer you didn't get the opportunity to do? Or is it flip? Or like what is it? How do you compare the thoughts you had back then compared to the reality of your thinking now?
All right, I truly don't think that I've ever missed an opportunity, because if I wanted an opportunity, I would take it. But
Snap.
no, that's true. I would. So to look back at anything and say, "No, I missed an opportunity," well, that's on you. You didn't miss an opportunity. You just missed a moment to walk through a door that you chose not to walk through. Whereas I feel that 24 years ago, somehow, some way, I made the right decision, and I'm very thrilled with my job now. I could never complain about this job. Like I help mounted units around the world get better. I help this unit get better. I am part of a team that is probably, I don't want to brag, but probably one of the best mounted units in the world.
Wow.
We get phone calls. You name the country, I've received a telephone call from that country for sure.
What is it about the Toronto Police Mounted Unit? What makes you guys so elite on the mounted unit spectrum?
I would say it's consistency. That's that professionalism and consistency. That's exactly what I would say. It's the easiest two words that you could put down to it. We were established in 1886. We're probably one of the longest standing mounted units in the world. There are several that have numbers lower than us, like the RCMP is 1881, but they no longer have a working, functioning mounted unit. So I would say we are probably one of the longest standing, continuous running mounted units in the world. And
I'm surprised that the Mounties don't have a continuous mounted. I mean, maybe I'm not surprised just because they're spread out so much, but their uniforms, for crying out loud, they were made for riding on horses.
Yes, they were. They do a wonderful performance of the musical ride. So they are keeping their traditions. But our tradition from 1886 has been public safety and professionalism, and I think that we continue to do that to this day. We're constantly trying to develop ourselves to make ourselves better. There are multiple things that have changed throughout the course of time, but yet the horse hasn't, and our saddle hasn't, and our head kits haven't, and the way in which we ride hasn't, and our boots haven't. But we now wear cameras, and we now, like, I can go a slew of different things that happened in 1886 that don't happen now. But we're changing, we're developing. Communication in that open line of communication has never been more needed than it is right now in today's society, with mental health issues and any of those sorts. Trying to keep the grounding effect in a social media world is a very, very difficult task.
Yes.
And I think that the old school mounted, riding on horse type thing brings us back to reality, which is people are people. They have conversations to say. Most of them just want to be heard. Once they're heard, you can have a conversation. You're not hiding behind a screen and saying things on text messages or anything like that. Open, honest conversation. And I think that, going back to the old is probably what should be the new, right? Like we need to come back to the reality of people being people and having, face-to-face type conversations.
I actually heard a story on the radio the other day that there's a study or a series of studies that have been done that show the positive impact on your mental health if you talk to strangers. So say you're on the subway and you turn and you say, "Hey, how's your day going?" And you have strike up a conversation. You're actually going to be happier talking to strangers. So maybe that's why your eyes light up so much and you've got such a smile on your face and you can pull the horse mask on you. It's probably had a great impact on your mental health. Just the fact that you are going out and not just talking to strangers, but they're talking back to you in like a civil way and talking to you like a human being. So you just mentioned like 1886 when the mounted unit came along. And I think that's a great opportunity to pivot to the fact that you have a horse in the mounted unit who is sort of, a tribute to the chief back in the day that brought in the mounted unit. Tell me about that horse and how that horse has become so famous in recent years?
Recent years, yes, recent years. He is as famous as they come, that one. So Chief Draper was the chief at the time of the Toronto Police back in 1886. And he established the mounted unit back in 1886. And it started off with 2 officers and 2 horses. And obviously it led to where we are now. And it's the oldest and longest standing unit in the Toronto Police. And it's probably, like I said, one of the oldest in the world. But we follow tradition here. We're very, very much into tradition. So we decided to name a horse after our forefather, the one that started this whole thing, which is Chief Draper. So we decided to name a horse Draper. And when we buy horses, we buy them on a 2-week trial basis. So we take them and we make sure that they're gonna suit our needs and live the lifestyle and are happy and content to do so. And eventually we wander off the grounds and we get into like the Liberty Village area and on King Street, Queen Street, stuff like that. And I have ridden horses through these divisions for 24 years. And oftentimes you get assigned the same horse. So you're always out on the same horse. And I've gone years where I've met the same people every single day, and they ask me every single day, "What's the name of your horse?" And it's
Really?
you want to say this is the same horse they met yesterday, but you can't say that, right? So you go right back to this is the first time this person's ever asked me.
Yes.
My horse is Eddie, for example. But
is there a horse named Eddie?
We had Eddie. Eddie was my favorite horse of all time, so that's why it came to my mind. But Draper. So we're walking along, and Draper has a mustache, and he has a wicked, wicked, wicked mustache. Like his mustache comes out to about this distance wide. Like it just dangles down. It would be the perfect one that you could get like mustache wax and wax it in curly Q. Like you could make curly Qs out of this for sure.
I feel like have you not done that? Have you not tried that?
Kind of, sort of, but usually we're not using the wax. We're just using the grime from the food that he ate last, and you can kind of sort of with the dirty mustache and make it happen. But so we're out on the road, and my partner, she was the one that was training Draper at the time. So during the COVID, her and I were partners all the way through COVID, and I went out with Draper every single day, and every single day, everybody knew this horse's name. It was like an episode of Cheers, where everybody knows your name. It was crazy.
So you kept the mustache. He didn't have to shave the mustache when he became a police officer.
So we were supposed to shave it, but I get to make that decision whether or not it gets shaved or not. And it was so different. Like it was so different that I thought I've never seen anything like this. And then when I saw the public outreach on how much they love this horse, it was crazy. People would like drive their cars and slam them over to the side and park their cars so they could rip their kids out of the back seat so they could meet the horse with the mustache. Or they'd be driving up beside you and they'd lower the windows so that the kids could see, and everyone's like, "Oh, the mustache!"
Yeah.
And then everyone knew his name was Draper. So I've always been part of the Movember campaign, right? The Movember campaign for men's health. So I've always been part of that, and it just dawned on me one day. I thought, you know what a perfect spokesperson. Well, I can't be a person. Spokeshorse.
Ambassador.
For the Movember campaign. Yeah. And ambassadorship is one of our core values here at the Mounted Unit. So this is perfect. Like, absolutely, you couldn't have a better subject matter than a horse. Everybody loves a horse, right? So I kind of sort of threw it to my boss, and my staff goes, it's not a bad idea. So then we threw it all the way up to the top, and they all kind of were in the same sort of agreement. So I got a hold of Scott Bradbury, who was he's the team leader of Movember, of the Follicle Force. And I said it to him, and he went, "Oh my God, this is perfect." And I kept saying my horse has a mustache, but then they actually saw it, and it's mind blowing to see. It really is. And then from there, it just took off. And the Movember actual campaign, I'll never forget. I was sitting at a restaurant, and I was eating dinner, and it was one of those sports type restaurants that had like all the TVs from floor to ceiling, right? And all of a sudden, I was on the television, and it was like, but it wasn't me. It was Draper's draping mustache, but his mustache had to have been like 15 feet tall. Right? It was the longest mustache I've ever seen. I thought, this is the best ad I've ever seen. Like I've ever seen. And then, unfortunately, I started hearing the sound of my voice, and I'm like, "Oh, now you're shrinking in your seat, right?" You're thinking,
you're going to hear the sound of your voice again with this, right?
Exactly. Just I'm going to continue to eat. I'm not going to look up, but you want to look up, right? But I'm not going to look up.
Yeah.
And then it got followed with the Austin Matthews doing his ad for Movember. And I thought, I have never upstaged Austin Matthews before, but right, here we go.
Just did.
No, I didn't. Draper did.
Draper did.
Like he was so that character.
Oh,
and
I love that.
Every single time we've ever been interviewed about this or anything like that, he is such a character. He's so curious. He's the one that's always sticking his muzzle in the microphone or in the camera, and he's, making it all dirty with smudge marks from his mustache and so on. And because of that, in the course of the last 2 years, he has actually been the #1 raising police officer in Canada for 2 years running now. So he's a remarkable little beast, and it's a perfect way. We were talking about the line of communication. We were talking about mental health, and November has kind of sort of gone almost in that direction now, where mental health and the importance of mental health and men's mental health is very important these days. Right now, about 4 out of every 5 men that commit suicide, 4 out of every 5 people that commit suicide are men. And being able to establish that through the Movember campaign is just bringing light even further in the direction of having that humanity kind of effect, and what Draper did just simply by being Draper is brought so much light to a very critical conversation. But it's also
especially in policing. I mean, as a police officer,
absolutely,
anybody who's a police officer, you guys and gals, you feel the impact of that, the mental health, and having. I'm not going to ask you about this, but I'm assuming you probably know people who have died that way, and like what a great thing for you to play such a pivotal role in that critical conversation.
Yeah, it's the most kind of sort of gentle-hearted way to bring out that conversation or that awareness and put that subject matter in the forefront. And it was a pleasure doing it for the last 2 years. I was debating whether or not Draper has kind of sort of lost his star power or not, but
no.
Well, we'll see. I may have to. We have a mayor here that can grow a pretty good mustache too, so I might grow a mustache on the mayor and be more inclusive, right? I'll have a male and a female.
It's funny because what did you guys let Draper just like grow his hair out too during COVID because the mayor was growing his hair out during COVID? Or were you guys still grooming the horses? No, the horses still got their haircuts.
Yeah, they still get groomed, but at the time he was a remount, so our horses that are in training, they still have their forelock, so they still have the front part of their mane. They lose the rest of their mane because they're crowd control horses, but they still do have the front part of their mane, which is called the forelock. So Draper was rocking the forelock there. He kind of sort of had the skater kid look, the floppy little hair that you
get your hair out of your eyes, Draper. Exactly. It's driving me crazy.
Exactly. So he's graduated since now, so he no longer has his forelock. So now he kind of sort of looks like that senior wily veteran with the big long mustache.
Yes, I love that.
He doesn't look like the 70s guy.
So we started this conversation by pointing out your 3 career aspirations: veterinarian, teacher, and police officer. So it's clear how you've been able to put on the teaching hat in your role as training sergeant down at the mounted unit. Veterinary hat you've also been able to wear because you guys, like, just describe for me quickly what you need to do for these horses aside from ride them around.
All right, so obviously it's the day-to-day care of these horses. It's my job to establish the relationships or the marriages where I appoint who is going to be assigned to whom. I try not to make it my own personal job. So what I do is I incorporate the entire training team. So all of the trainers get together and we kind of sort of work out all of those marriages, I should say. So once you're assigned a horse, you're responsible for its day-to-day upkeep. And should there be any health concerns or anything like that that require, aftercare, then those officers are required to do that aftercare on those horses. So I totally agree with what you're saying. I am now in a situation where, if any of the horses have any illness or ailment or anything like that, I'm the one that gets the phone calls at 4 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the morning when something happens. And from there, we make that decision whether or not we're going to call in, our actual vet, and then we go from there. But it's been excellent in that I have been able to find a job that incorporated all 3 of my beginning professions that I wanted to do.
Isn't that incredible? You found a job where it's allowed you to be a teacher, sort of a somewhat veterinarian, and of course a police officer in so many different capacities, even though you've been in the same unit for the vast majority of your career. Kristopher, is there anything else that you'd like people to know about yourself, about police officers in general, or policing in general?
I would say that we're all out there. We're all trying our best. We're trying to do everything that we possibly can to make this world a better place. We're all equally as approachable. You are more than welcome to come and ask any of us on the mounts unit for sure at any time about any of our horses. We are there for your safety. We're trying to look out for everyone and what's best for everybody. And overall, I love having those, you call them stranger conversations, but I love having those conversations every day with different people and new people. And I love that, they're sitting on their phones or they've got their Walkmans. Walkman, that's how old I am. Sorry. They've got their,
it's probably a Discman by now.
Or at least, the Beats headphones or something like that. They've got those on, and then all of a sudden they probably don't hear the clip clopping, but then all of a sudden there's a horse in front of them, and their expression always is something like this, and they're like, and they instantly smile, but they instantly smile every single time. And I feel that if I can walk down the street and make 300 people smile in a day, like how many jobs do you get to do that?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And every single time I see one of those smiles, I realize that, policing gets a bad name and people often look at it in a bad way, but you wouldn't get that smile if that was the true reflection of the true thoughts of what people really believe.
Yeah.
And that is that instant surprise moment, and you're not getting the scowls, you're getting those smiles, you're getting those that happy kind of approach. And society is a good society. Like there are people that are out there that we all want to do what's good. We all want to make things better. And I just happen to be doing it on the back of a horse and quite enjoy my job. And I love, I was blessed to land in the Toronto Police Mounted Unit, and I'm trying to, continue the path of the unit and the forefathers before me to make it as great as it used to be and continue it and make it even better for the future.
I love that so much. You just reminded me of when my kids are angry and they're like putting the biggest scowl on their face, and me or my husband just say like, don't smile. And then they smile. It's like, see, you're not mad at me. So it's police officers walking down the street and people saying, oh, okay, fine. I do like you guys. I was just putting on that act. What a beautiful note to end on. Thank you so much, Sergeant. It has been such a pleasure speaking with you today. And I'm so excited to share your voice with the world, or at least the Toronto public.
Thank you for having me.